Very excited to have you today for our second episode of Fuel for Thought. So very excited to see a bunch of people here from different sports to have a great discussion around the science behind what fuels you. We had a great suggestion to talk a little bit more about fatigue and how we can try to avoid fatigue if at all possible. And we've also had some questions about, can you explain more about the science behind performance nutrition? So I'm very excited to get a chance to do that today. My name is Katie Knappenberger, and I'm the Director of Performance Nutrition here at Northwestern. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But if you all have questions as we're going through the material, just feel free to put the questions in the chat. We're also going to have some time at the end where you can tune in and speak up and ask your own questions, or you can put them in the chat at the end as well. But I want to make sure that you all get exactly what you came for in terms of your questions answered as they relate to you. So let's go ahead and get started. I will move to the next slide. So first of all, we're going to talk about human energy. We're going to talk about how do we get energy into our bodies, how do we store it, and then how do we use it in order to complete not only exercise, but just the daily tasks that we need to complete as human beings. Then we're going to talk about the sources of nutrition-related fatigue. And I think that the foundation of understanding how we get and store and use energy for exercise is going to help with this, because when you see how the systems break down, then you'll understand exactly why you're getting tired. So we're going to talk about underfueling our energy systems, because that can be a source of fatigue. We're also going to talk about brain fuel and blood sugar stabilization, because that's a really important piece around how you stay alert and focused in class and throughout the day with just fueling your brain, because that can be kind of fatiguing if we're not strategic about that. And then obviously whenever we talk about energy, we need to talk about the quick fix, which is caffeine. How can we utilize caffeine safely if we choose to utilize caffeine? So let's move along and get started with energy. How do we get it? All right. This is no surprise. We get energy from food. We get energy from digesting our food. So the minute that we get the food in our mouth, we start breaking it down chemically with the enzymes in our mouth, and we start breaking it down mechanically with our teeth. The food goes down our esophagus. The food goes into our stomach, where it's continually getting mechanically crunched up and chemically broken down by the enzymes. The food goes into our small intestine, where the pieces now are so small that they can get through the walls of the small intestine into our bloodstream, and they can go to our liver, they can go to our muscles, our working muscles, and we can use that energy for fuel. So that's kind of a bit, the basic overview that I think everybody knows from high school biology class. But it's important to keep that in mind, that you can trick the system into feeling like you maybe have more energy with things that are not food calories, but only food calories are where actual real energy is going to come from. So I also want to give a shout out to supporting our microbiome. So there is a ton of organisms inside our digestive tract, and these organisms are absolutely critical for a bunch of things, but the ones I want to highlight today are helping us digest our food, and they're very important for our immune system. So we can keep this bacteria healthy by feeding it prebiotics and probiotics. And so prebiotics would include things like oats, onions, garlic, asparagus, some barley, wheat types of things that are with the prebiotics. So the prebiotics are food for that good bacteria to live off of. And then the probiotics are actually good bacteria itself, which can get in and just provide a great environment for your microbiota to thrive. So probiotics would include things like yogurt or kombucha or kimchi. So we want to include those foods in our regular diet. So if you're kind of thinking about in the past 24 hours, I would just pause right now and think, all right, in the past 24 hours, did I eat any of the foods that Katie just said that have prebiotics and probiotics in them? If the answer to that is no, or maybe not very many, you could benefit from including some of those foods in your day so that we can support healthy digestion, and healthy digestion is ultimately going to improve the efficiency of getting the foods into our system and our energy levels as well. And so just a quick shout out to your microbiome. Let's move on and talk about, all right, now that the energy is in our body, like I said, down your esophagus, in your stomach, through to your small intestine, it's in your bloodstream. Now, how do we store that energy or that ATP that, that I'm going to talk about in a little bit? We can store carbohydrate in our blood. We can store carbohydrate in our liver, and we can store carbohydrate in our muscle. As you can see, we store very little carbohydrate in our blood, but it's very important to fueling our brain. Our brain prefers to use glucose as energy. If we don't have enough glucose or carbohydrate in our system, we will start to feel like we're not quite thinking as clearly. Maybe our reaction time isn't quite as well. Isn't going as well. So we want to keep that blood glucose supply going. And there's things that we can do that I'll talk about in a little bit. We want to keep enough carbohydrates in our body to support our liver glycogen, because our liver glycogen is going to break down. So glycogen is just a long string of glucose put together. But we're going to take that glycogen and break it down if our blood sugar gets low, so that we can support it and keep it from going into like a dangerous place. So we're going to continue to revisit blood glucose and carbohydrates. So if it's not grabbing on the first time, I'll make it all make sense at the end. But then we also are going to store carbohydrates in our muscles. The carbohydrates in our muscles are absolutely critical for the exercise that we do. I'm going to show you in a little bit that for some types of exercise that we do, carbohydrates are the only thing that we can use in order to keep us rolling. So muscle glycogen is very important. It gets depleted after we finish a longer exercise or more intense exercise bout. And that's why we have carbohydrate recommendations in our refuel. That's why we say when you're done, we recommend chocolate, milk, and cherry juice, whatever it is, because that has not only the protein to help rebuild the muscles, but the carbohydrate so that you can get your glycogen stores going back up to normal, and you'll be able to come back to that next day of exercise with glycogen stores kind of filled up. So it's important. We also can use fat for fuel. So we also can break down muscle triglycerides, which is the fat that's in our muscles. Some people don't realize that there's actually fat inside of our muscles. They think fat is just a big lump of protein. There's actually fat inside of our muscles, which is a very important fuel source, especially for longer duration exercise that's maybe a little bit lower intensity. So that's an important fuel source as well. And then we can use fat from our adipose tissue as well, from our normal fat stores that we have in our body. So another potential fuel source, though, is muscle protein. So this is not ideal. We are, if we're doing really intense exercise, probably going to break down a little bit of protein and use it for fuel. But we want to do whatever we can in our power to not break down muscle protein, because the muscle is critical for maintaining our strength. It's critical for maintaining our form, especially in swimming, running, and some of the other sports that we have in here. And some of you work really hard to put on the appropriate lean muscle for what you're doing. It's hard to get in the weight room and do muscle hypertrophy and build strength. And so we don't want to break it down just every day in practice, going through what we're supposed to do in practice. So what happens is, if we don't fuel appropriately with carbohydrate, the amount of muscle protein that we burn goes up. Okay, so it is a possible fuel source. Our body will use it if it needs to, but it's not our preferred source of energy. Okay, so talking more about energy and how do we use it. So we talked about carbohydrate as an energy source. We talked about fat as an energy source. We talked about protein as a not very preferred energy source, but we can use it if we have to. All of those macronutrients get broken down to ATP. So now I'm taking you back to high school biology class, adenosine triphosphate. So, and it's an adenosine molecule, as you can see here on the screen, with 3 phosphates on it. And when we pull a phosphate off of this molecule, energy comes out, okay? So sometimes people, when they're talking about this, they put a lightning bolt where I have this current arrow, because when you bust this bond, and you bust lots of them when you're doing your exercise and your training, when you break that bond, that's when the energy comes out, and you can use that energy for strength, for power, for endurance, for whatever you need to use it for. So know that the macronutrients all come down to ATP, and our ability to continue exercise is dependent on our ability to continue to regenerate ATP. So when we pull off a phosphate, now there's only 2 phosphates left, adenosine diphosphate. We need to figure out a way to remake ATP so that we can keep going. And this is the role of nutrition. Nutrition has to constantly be making more and more ATP so that we can continue to rock and roll. Okay. I hope this is all making sense. If it's not, please put a question in the chat. Okay. All right. So energy, how do we replenish ATP? Remember, this is the key for us to continue to exercise. So I want to take some time to explain this chart to you. So on the y-axis, you can see energy production as a percentage of your maximum effort. So 100% is as hard as you can go, as hard as you can run, as hard as you can swim, as hard as you can hit the ball, etc. Obviously, you can only do something as hard as you possibly can for a short amount of time. But when we are doing the as hard as we can types of activities, we have about 2 seconds of ATP stored in our muscle. So if anything that's going to take more than 2 seconds, we need to bust into another energy system to replenish the ATP. So the first energy system that we're going to break into is this ATP CP, or the phosphocreatine energy system. So this energy system is going to regenerate ATP very fast. It's going to be utilized especially in short, quick, powerful movements. So think about your maximum lifts in the weight room. Think about a sprint, like the all you have sprint out to the finish line. That is when you're going to use this energy system. So obviously, if you need to give those all out quick burst short efforts, you want to make sure that this system is being fueled. And this system is actually fueled by muscle creatine. So we haven't talked about muscle creatine as a fuel source, but that's coming up on the next slide, because I knew I'm gonna get some questions about creatine supplementation and all of that. So I want to make sure that we cover that in depth. But in order to utilize the phosphocreatine energy system, we've got to have muscle creatine in the system. Now, this is for anything that you do that's less than a minute. It's very hard for less than a minute. If you don't have adequate muscle creatine stores and you need to go very hard for less than a minute, it's not going to work out very well for you. That's where fatigue starts to come in, because if we haven't fueled this energy system appropriately, we're going to start to sense fatigue if we have to do that type of exercise. Say you don't have to do that type of exercise in your training. You don't have to just give everything you have for less than a minute very often. So maybe you're somebody whose training bouts are more like 1 to 3 minutes. Maybe you do 1 to 3 minutes of activity and then you get a break. Okay. So that's going to be a system that's fueled by the anaerobic glycolysis system. In this system, we're going to be pulling carbohydrate from the muscles primarily and throwing it in the system to regenerate ATP. So if you need to do exercise with that's pretty hard for 1 to 3 minutes. I'm thinking about, maybe some of our swimming events that we have on the line here. Or if we are going from end zone to end zone, and that's maybe taking close to a minute, perhaps, we're going to need carbohydrate. If we don't have it, we're going to sense fatigue and we're not going to perform. Okay. And then our last system is the aerobic system. So the aerobic system can run off of fat as fuel. If you notice on the chart, though, when you're running off of primarily fat as fuel down here, you are not going to be able to go as hard as you can. Your intensity caps out right around, here, and this is not a fuel source for as hard as you can work. The fuel source for as hard as you can is carbohydrate and muscle creatine. So noting that, you can see a couple things. The energy systems are all kind of overlapping a little bit. They're all working at the same time, but there is a primary one, and we need to make sure that we are fueling the energy system that is going to prevent us from fatiguing. Does that make sense? If this is making sense, thumbs up in the chat would be awesome, just so that I know that we're hitting, we're making sure you guys know what's going on. Awesome, thank you. So the phosphocreatine energy system, I kind of like to think about that as a monster.
So do you give a thumbs up?
Yes, thank you for the thumbs up. You guys are awesome. So the phosphocreatine energy system, the one that is as hard as you can for less than a minute, I like to think about that as a monster truck. Okay, quick, short, powerful, but it runs out of gas quick. So if we've got to keep going for longer than that, we're going to bust into needing carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are maybe more like a sports car. They can go fast, all right? They can go fast. Gas for these cars can be expensive, and it is limiting. So we can run out of carbohydrate. If we are doing, some longer, more intense tempo runs, we can run out of carbohydrate. So I kind of like to think about that as a sports car. And then in terms of the more economic car, that would be the aerobic system that runs off of fat. You're not going to run out of gas very quickly, but also you're not going to be able to go very fast. Okay. So hopefully that analogy kind of helps you remember that. All right. So then we got to talk about creatine. Okay. Creatine is definitely a fuel source for our exercise that is lasting maybe up to 15, up to 30 seconds. So this is, think about our lifts, think about our strength training where we're really trying to build strength and we're lifting heavy. So first of all, what is creatine? Creatine is a compound derived of amino acids, so building blocks of protein. It's stored in the skeletal muscle. And honestly, the creatine supplementation is one of the most researched dietary supplements out there. It's very common to use for people who utilize this energy system: quick, powerful, fast, short bursts. We can absolutely get creatine from our food. We store creatine in our muscles, all of us, regardless of if we take creatine supplementation or not. As long as we eat some kind of meat products, generally our creatine sources are pretty good, but some people do benefit from a creatine supplementation. So you can see from the graphics here that creatine helps restore ATP. So when that phosphate bond gets ripped off, creatine is right there saying, here, have another phosphate, and remake ATP again so we can rip it off again and create more energy. You can see from this chart here that creatine can actually help buffer lactic acid. And so in these types of exercise, buffering lactic acid for high intensity short burst activity is a benefit for sure. It can make us, get that one extra rep or get a few more extra steps of power at the sprint to the finish type of a deal. So some people that take creatine supplementation experience decreased fatigue, increased ability to perform reps, increased strength, etc. So some of you on this call might be considering a creatine supplement. And if you are, we would love to help you with that. It's important that you just don't go into any random dietary supplement store and tell the clerk, that you want a creatine supplement, and then they just hand you one, because you're an elite athlete. Your body is not a garbage disposal, and we want to make sure that you have the highest quality, lowest risk product, that you are dosing it appropriately, and that you have a nutrition plan that's really going to support what you're doing with creatine. Because if you're doing creatine but the rest of your nutrition kind of stinks, you're just not going to really see the performance benefits that might be there. We also want to help, if you're considering a creatine supplement, make sure that you are adequately hydrated, because if you're not, there can be some side effects. And we also want to make sure that if you're considering a creatine supplement, that you are prepared for some additional weight gain that is going to come in the form of water being stored in the muscle. So Just another note, some people already get enough creatine through the foods that they eat. They eat chicken, they eat salmon, they eat beef, they eat pork. These are regular things in their diet. And when they try an additional creatine supplement, their creatine pool is already optimized, and this supplement just really doesn't help them at all. And so we want to be there for you as well if that's something that is going through your mind as well. So just kind of something to keep on your radar about creatine, because it absolutely is a fuel source for that phosphocreatine system. Okay, so now let's get into a little bit of nutrition related fatigue, okay? Some nutrition-related fatigue can be due to underfueling the energy systems. So if you are an athlete that is primarily operating off of carbohydrate, which a lot of you on this call are athletes that are operating off of carbohydrate, and you underfuel your anaerobic systems, you're gonna have a really hard time, just getting through the first workout, but you're really going to have a hard time getting through the workout the next day after you've depleted your muscle glycogen stores, and then you're still kind of not getting enough carbohydrate, and then you try to come back around. So this is something we want to be careful of. I would say one of the big contributors to people underfueling their energy systems is just kind of buying into this whole low carbohydrate diet culture chatter that's going on. There's so much stuff on the internet. I literally pulled all of these pictures in like 3 seconds off the internet today. It was super easy to Google low carbohydrate diets for athletes, and then all this stuff comes up. And so it is very unlikely that if this is a road that you're trying to go down, not fueling your energy systems appropriately, we're going to see fatigue, we're going to see injury, we're going to see illness, etc. The other piece of it is, we said fat is a fuel source as well. And so it's unlikely that you run out of fat, but there is a small segment of the athletic population that is very, very lean. And if we are too lean and we don't have enough fat stores, it's possible that could lead to some fatigue and some suboptimal performance for a variety of reasons. So we got to keep in mind that we want carbohydrate in our diet for fuel. We want fat in our diet for fuel. We just got to start to think about the timing, which I'm going to get at in a little bit. So the other thing is dehydration. I think most of you have heard my analogy on dehydration, but I really like to think of, our bloodstream in our body as a highway, okay? Our plasma is basically water, and if we are optimally hydrated, our bloodstream highway is 5 lanes. We are wide open, and that bloodstream can move oxygen, can move nutrients from the small intestine through to the liver, through to the muscle, wherever those fuel kind of stores or sources need to go. It's awesome, okay? But if we are dehydrated, then we are kind of operating with a 1-lane highway. It's going to take a little bit longer for oxygen and nutrients to get to where they're going to need to go. And additionally, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to dissipate heat when you're exercising. And so if you can't get heat out of your body efficiently while you're exercising, you're going to have problems with heat illness, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, especially if you're training in the heat already. So optimal hydration is a little bit outside the scope of this talk, but it is so critical to maintaining and avoiding fatigue. So the next thing that I want to talk about on the next slide is blood sugar swings. And so we can control our blood glucose kind of with the foods that we eat, and we can keep it in a really safe, lovely zone that our body loves to live in, or not. And so if we're strategic about our snacks, if we're strategic about our meals, we can keep our blood sugar in that lovely little zone and keep our body kind of feeling like it's not on a roller coaster of energy during the day. So we'll get to that in a second. And then if after these 3 kind of main points, you're still fatigued, you need to ask for help. We need to start talking about non-nutrition related things like sleep or stress or a variety of other health concerns, deficiencies, and things like that. So if these things don't work when you try them and implement them into your life, then please come and ask for help, because there is more that we can do if you are feeling fatigued. All right. So let's get into normal blood glucose physiology. Welcome to the science behind blood glucose. So let's look at this chart, okay? On the y-axis, we have blood glucose levels, and pretty normal blood glucose levels are going to be somewhere between 70 and less than 200, okay? Our blood glucose is going to fluctuate during the day depending on if we just ate, if we haven't eaten for a while, maybe if we're exercising, and it can also vary due to stress hormones as well. So this picture that I'm showing you here is kind of an ideal blood glucose over time, okay? So if you notice here, when we have a meal, our blood glucose gets elevated. This is a good thing because it means that we have a little extra sugar in our blood, and that glucose is going to be able to go into our muscles or into our liver to store the carbohydrate for later when we need it. All right. So it's a good thing that it's high. You have hormones that are able to kind of keep this in the safe range. So when it gets a little bit higher than normal, your pancreas is going to release insulin, and glucose is going to be able to go into the muscle cells and be converted to glycogen. And this is all a very good thing if you're an athlete. And quite honestly, the athletes on this call, because of the training that you do, your body is really good at this. Your body is really good at taking sugar from your blood and putting it in your muscles. You've trained it to do that, and it's awesome. All right. People that don't exercise are not as good at doing this as you all are. So then we get blood glucose kind of back into the normal range, and then maybe we go a little while without eating and it dips below normal, all right? And then we have to call on glucagon, another hormone in our body, to take the carbohydrate back out of our muscles and out of our liver and put it back into our bloodstream so that our brain can stay happy. Because remember, our brain needs this blue zone of glucose in order to feel awesome, all right? Does that make sense? Thumbs up, everyone? All right, so what we need to do is be strategic with our meals and snacks and keep our blood glucose in the blue zone, in the safe zone, in the feeling awesome zone, all right? I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about how this can get messed up, okay? Obviously, if somebody has type 1 or type 2 diabetes, they're gonna need some assistance with insulin, perhaps, with medication, perhaps. I'm not going to talk, this is not diabetes education today. This is regular, healthy, awesome athlete blood sugar regulation today. Okay, so let's go on then and just look at this chart. Okay, can everyone see my arrow? Yes? Okay, wonderful, because I'm going to draw you some imaginary lines here, and I want you to kind of follow along with me. So let's just talk about how this goes amazingly. Well, actually, no, let's talk about how it goes wrong, all right? Let's talk about the standard American who perhaps wakes up not in enough time to eat breakfast and grabs a donut and maybe a cup of coffee on their way to work. Thumbs up if you've seen people like this. Yes, okay. So what happens here is when we consume that really simple carbohydrate, it's gonna help bring our blood sugar up really fast, all right? Our brain is actually gonna crave it, and we've gone a whole night without eating, and so our liver glycogen is perhaps a little bit depleted, and so we're gonna crave simple sugars. Our brain's gonna say, feed me, and so we're gonna get a huge spike. So you all can see my arrow, huge spike in our blood sugar, okay? And now, especially in you all athletes, you are really good at taking this sugar and putting it into your muscles. So we are going to get a huge spike, and then we're gonna get a huge crash, right? So now we're at a huge crash, and our blood glucose is perhaps below the blue safety zone, and our body's gonna start to get some messages of, I need to fix this. I'm getting tired. I'm not feeling my best. So I'm going to physiologically crave simple carbohydrates again. And let's pick on the standard American again. Maybe at this point we're mid-morning and we're like, oh my gosh, I still feel terrible. I'm going to grab an energy drink. Okay. Or I'm going to grab a soda or something in the middle of the day. And so there we go again with the simple carbohydrate with nothing else with it. We're going to spike our blood sugar up really nice and high, and it's going to come crashing down. And so I think that you all kind of get the point as, okay, now we're crashing down again at lunch. So when our blood sugar is low, do you think that we're going to make awesome nutrition choices and well-balanced winning plates that fuel our goals and all of that? Probably not. We're just going to be scrounging for whatever is closest to us. So we could end up going on this roller coaster, potentially all day long. Let's try then. I'm going to do a little experiment with annotation, and we're going to try drawing on the slides as recommended by the chat. So let's try drawing on the slides. We have a really balanced breakfast. Okay, let's say that we get up and we have a breakfast like a frozen breakfast burrito. Last week on the call, we talked about how we can do some meal prep around preparing homemade frozen breakfast burritos ourselves. And you can take a whole wheat tortilla, and you can take eggs, and you can take black beans, and you can take salsa, and you can wrap this whole thing up, and you can freeze like 20 of them, I don't know, in your freezer and just have them ready. So this is an awesome breakfast because it's got a few awesome things in it. Number one, it has protein in it. All right. It has it has some fat in it, some fat from the egg yolk, which is awesome. It has some fiber in it, fiber from the beans and fiber from the, let me get this back. There we are. Oh goodness. All right. My annotation's getting a little crazy. All right. And we have some from the beans, some fiber. So we're going to get a nice steady rise and a more steady fall versus just a simple sugar type of a breakfast. Okay. Then maybe we get to lunch and we're still in kind of the great blue zone, and we're more in a better position to make a winning plate for lunch. So maybe we're going to have a stir fry that has rice, brown rice for the fiber, and we're going to have vegetables for more fiber. We're going to have protein with the chicken. We're going to add some olive oil for healthy fats, and we'll also have some carbohydrate in there. So that's awesome. Okay. So now we're going up slowly and going down. So let's say that you have a afternoon practice. Okay. Everyone can see the blue line here. This is the time to be an athlete. All right. It's an afternoon practice. We need to pre-fuel. We need to get our blood glucose up a little bit higher so that we can use some of this carbohydrate to help us stay focused, to help us think, to help fuel us and help perform. So maybe we go ahead and have a honey stinger waffle, or we have a sports drink, or we have something, fruit snacks or something like that. This is a very appropriate time for that, to spike this up so that we can have some energy to sustain our exercise. Okay. So I think that you all kind of get the point here. The main points that I want to make are that if we get carbohydrate, protein, fiber, and healthy fat in our meals, we can have this steady kind of up and down blood glucose versus the spikes and the crashes that make us feel terrible and just don't really serve our recovery very well. They don't really serve our performance very well. And so this is really what I think is one of the keys for me is, that first mid-morning snack. I usually get a decent breakfast in, but that mid-morning snack, I have a choice when I'm at work to spike up my blood glucose by having a very simple carbohydrate snack that I, just have around, maybe fruit snacks or something like that. Or I can have something that's going to sustain me. So just something to keep in mind. This is, if you can figure out how to integrate this into your plan, it's really honestly life-changing. Let's go from there. All right. So this is a way to kind of circumvent the system a little bit. So what about caffeine? Caffeine certainly makes us feel energized. Absolutely. I definitely engage in some of the performance enhancing benefits of caffeine. But what is it? Caffeine is a really powerful stimulant. And so the science behind caffeine is that it's an antagonist to the adenosine receptors in your brain. So the adenosine receptors in your brain, when they are working and being acted upon, they cause relaxation. So when caffeine binds to them as the antagonist, there is not a relaxation that occurs, and it causes alertness and wakefulness, and that's kind of the benefits that people who use caffeine kind of enjoy, right? I think the big thing to remember with caffeine, though, is it's literally just affecting these receptors in your brain. It's not actually giving you any calories that you can convert to ATP and keep making ATP so that you can keep your blood sugar up, or you can sustain your exercise or things like that. That's not, if you're just having a simple cup of green tea with nothing else in it, it's literally just kind of messing with your brain a little bit, which is not a problem. I just think you should know the science behind it. Okay. So caffeine occurs naturally in plants, including coffee beans and tea leaves and cocoa, like chocolate. But then it's often extracted from these plants and then put into other things as well. In sports, we see caffeinated sports-like drinks. We see caffeinated bars. We see caffeinated gels. And so we can get caffeine in other forms besides just coffee and tea and chocolate. So how much caffeine is safe? Okay. In general, 1 to 2 cups of coffee and tea a day is generally safe. That keeps us somewhere, around or below the 200 milligram of caffeine limit. Okay. Every cup of brewed tea and coffee is going to be a little bit different. That's why I put those ranges on the side, because just depending on how it's brewed, it could be a little bit varied. Most people start to experience negative side effects when they get above 400 milligrams a day. So beware of supplements, beware of energy drinks, even beware of some kind of, sports type foods that can contain 300 to 500 milligrams of caffeine, because that's when we start to see increased heart rate. That's when we start to see increased blood pressure. And your heart already has to work hard enough when you're exercising. Your blood pressure already goes up when you're exercising. You don't want it to be already, up high and then compound it up high from the caffeine and then compound it to a dangerous place with exercise. So we need to be very careful with that. And then we need to be careful with, just taking an honest look at ourselves and saying, okay, are we caffeinating to the point where later in the day, we need some sort of a sleep aid to put us to sleep, and then we're waking up groggy from the sleep aid, like melatonin or something like that, and then we are caffeinating again on top of that. That's not a very great way to recover and restore our body as an athlete, so we need to be careful of that, okay? Caffeine in regular doses that I'm talking about right now, a cup or 2 of coffee or tea a day, totally fine. If we get above the 400 milligram limit, though, we are potentially putting ourselves at risk if we were to get drug tested with that much caffeine in our system. So caffeine is banned at really high levels, but my sense is that you would just kind of be feeling so jittery at that point that it would not be serving you as an athlete. So hopefully you're just not even going there. But I want to make sure in full transparency that you understand that if you do overdo it with caffeine, you do risk popping positive on a drug test. So just something to keep in mind. Another thing that I want you to keep in mind is that if you're consuming products with caffeine in it, if you're consuming like an iced coffee drink or something like that that has the caffeine on the side, sometimes those packages and sometimes those drinks have more than one serving in them. So you might see, that the nutrition label is for an 8-ounce serving of this drink, but there's 16 ounces in the bottle. So you have to take that caffeine amount and double it. So you just want to be aware of the serving size on this stuff as well. I think that if you utilize caffeine in your day in a safe way, that's 1 to 2 1 to 2 cups a day, maybe appropriately timed around your exercise, that's awesome. But if you have, additional questions about extra things, like caffeine pills or powders or energy drinks or something, we just bring those to Performance Nutrition so that we can help you navigate that, because we just want you to be safe around this stuff. And another thing to keep in mind is it affects people differently. Some people, if they have a bunch of caffeine in the morning, it still actually affects their sleep at night. So you want to be aware of that for yourself.